r/AskReddit. Students of Reddit, what was the biggest teacher meltdown you ever witnessed? My 8th grade algebra teacher, also German teacher, Mr. Cogburn, was an interesting guy. He was tall, had kind of wild looking frizzy grey hair and beard, and had a sort of boisterous larger than life kind of personality. He started every class by slamming the door and yelling. He yelled, or, as I would realize once I got into theater in high school, he projected through the entire class period, though he never really came across as intimidating. He always had a yardstick in his hand that he would slap forcefully against the blackboard to emphasize what he was saying. He would also slap it against the desks of students who weren't paying attention, though he was exceedingly careful to not actually hit the student. It wasn't terribly uncommon for him to break yardsticks, and there was always another in the supply cabinet to replace the one he'd broken. He had a little song/chant he made up for remembering the slope-intercept form of an equation for a line that I will probably remember until the day I die. He also gave the most effective, and, to 8th graders, both hilarious and embarrassing, explanation of how to divide fractions. He stood on a desk and told us always divide the top. Here he pointed at his head, by the bottom. Here he turned around and pointed at his own ass. Never divide the bottom, because the bottom, here he helpfully gestured up and down the length of his ass, is already divided. That's what Mr. Cogburn was like. He was big and loud and crazy, but not in a scary way. We told new students that the way to tell he was actually mad was if he started the class by shutting the door like a normal person and speaking quietly, and that was when they should be scared. Now we get to the story of the meltdown. Every year our school did an event called the Mathathon. Students were given math worksheets and tried to solve as many problems as they could in a set amount of time. People, usually the parents, would sponsor the students, pledging a certain amount of money for each problem correctly solved, and at the end the money was donated to a local charity that helps the disabled. It was that time of year and Mr. Cogburn was explaining the mathathon to my class, and when he got to the part about the charity and what they did, one boy, who probably thought himself incredibly cool and edgy, loudly said, "I don't know why anyone bothers to help those retards. We should just let them all die." And Mr. Cogburn transformed. As I said before, dude was tall, well over 6 feet, but his height never came across as imposing at all. Now he loomed over that student's desk like the goddamn angel of death. He seemed to physically radiate pure rage. I swear to all that's holy you could feel his outrage coming off him in waves. Even though he was focused solely on the one boy, students halfway across the room sank down in their chairs in pure terror, trying to disappear under their desks. I know, because I was one of them. We couldn't even look at him. Not out of the usual shit, he's mad, don't make eye contact instinct most people have, but more like it was a form of physical protection. He was a burning sun of anger, and if we looked directly at that sun it might blind us. He spoke very quietly to the boy for about a minute. I didn't make out what he said. Then he led the kid out of the room and shut the door. About a quarter of the class started crying as soon as he left. After a while the other math teacher came in and taught for the rest of the period. What we all found out later, and which none of us, including that boy, had known, was that Mr. Cogburn's daughter, who he spoke about to us frequently enough, was not his only child. He and his wife had also had a son that was born extremely physically disabled and who had died at a very young age from health complications arising from those disabilities. When he took that student out of the room, I think we all thought that he was going to kill him. He actually just took him down to the principal and explained what the kid had said, and the kid was suspended for a day. Mr. Cogburn also took the rest of the day off. So that was the biggest meltdown I ever saw from a teacher, and it was sort of the inverse of a normal meltdown. When he was shouting, gesticulating wildly, and hitting our desks with yardsticks, we loved the guy and feared nothing. But that day, when he got so quiet, we felt mortal fucking terror. Edit. I was not expecting this kind of response to my story. Thank you to everyone who complimented my writing. A few of you have asked if I've thought of writing a book. I'd love to. I just need to come up with an idea that isn't crap. Sadly, being a good writer doesn't necessarily mean you're also good at coming up with original ideas. To a thread where I actually have a relating experience. So back when I was 14, we had this math teacher, let's call him Mr. Bajingles. One day he shows up as usual, but there's something weird about him. He isn't really teaching, just rambling. Eventually he comes up to my table and says something about the moon. I can't remember exactly what, but it was incoherent, and he was starting to scare me. About 5 minutes later, 2 other teachers, I'm Icelandic teacher and English teacher, enter the room and escort him out. The Icelandic teacher then gets in front of the class and says something in the lines of, "Sorry kids, Mr. Bajingles is a bit under the weather today. Class is cancelled," and I could just see in her eyes that something was pretty far off. Now if you think this is the end of the story, oh boy, you're in for a treat. So about 1 week later or so, not much later, this same Icelandic teacher, a middle-aged nice lady, is teaching. A friend of mine starts with some shit. I can't remember what, and this nice old lady flips. I have never seen anything like it. Her face turns demonic, and she sprints to this mate of mine, grabs him by the clothes, and slams him on the table, and then proceeds to pound on him. The entire class was laughing hysterically, while my friend was getting fucking wrecked by this nice old lady. After the beatdown, she walked out of the room. She kept teaching 4 years afterwards. Nothing ever came out of it. Edit. Wait, I have more. Just gonna keep it quick, but I had another math teacher in another school. There was this fat chick in my class and she started with some shit. He wasn't having any of it and said, "Shut up, aren't you about to give birth to those twins you're carrying around soon?" Entire class went silent. Absolutely barbaric atmosphere. I saw him somewhere, if it was the cafeteria or something, and he was talking to someone and all I heard was, "Why should I apologize? She does look like she's carrying twins." Wouldn't be fucking surprised. He did apologize the day after, though. Edit 2. I actually have a shitload of these, now that I start thinking. I went to some pretty fucked up schools. If anyone reads this I'll post more. Edit 3 new story. So when I got a bit older, I started uni, and we had this one maths professor who was a bit off. Eventually he started only showing up 50% of the time or so, and we had to start teaching ourselves the curriculum, as there were no other professors to step up. One day I'm walking to the store, and as I get to the store I see my math professor standing outside with half a bottle of vodka in his hands. I nod, he nods. As if we are just passing each other on a normal day. I never heard from him again. One teacher, who was normally very upbeat and talkative, spent the 5 minutes before class standing in the hallway one day with her arms crossed and her head down. She wouldn't talk to anyone, only nodding at students as they tried to initiate conversation while walking into her class. When everyone had found their seats and the bell had rung, she slowly walked over to a boombox, one very much like that of Say Anything fame. She started this monologue that, honestly, I don't think any of us understood. Stuff about how relationships are built on compromise, pain, and, eventually, and this is a key word here, forgiveness. What I didn't know at the time was that this woman was in the midst of what would eventually be her divorce from her husband, a divorce that would be dragged out over the next 5 years. What I also didn't know was how uncomfortable the next 5 minutes would be because of what she was going through, though, in hindsight, I'm sure it was worse for her. She finally explained that she wanted us not to read, it was a lit class, after all, but to just listen, to feel the words and the music, as she so eloquently put it. She pressed play on the boombox, and Don Henley's heart of the matter poured out through the speakers. At first, it was just uncomfortable, because no one was moving, no one was saying anything. Her eyes were closed, she was just hearing this song. The closer it got to the chorus, however, the more awkward I began to feel. She started by simply swaying back and forth, and by the time Henley sings Forgiveness, she was doing this alien little kicks dance, sceneful, while a class full of high schoolers watched in total douche-chilling horror. Here's the thing, that song is like 5.5 minutes long, which is, at 17, an absolute eternity. Or, it was for me. She was crying, sweating, singing along, doing this crazy dance, and none of us could stop her. Or, rather, none of us did. When she was done, She just sort of wiped her runny makeup away, smeared it, really, and tried to teach class, as though nothing had happened, but you could tell no one was really into it. I think we were all trying to process what we had just seen, and no one could really figure it out. It was weird to us in the moment. Now, it's become my post-breakup ritual. We had a fairly passive substitute teacher in my app history class. Our teacher was fairly new to the school and was known to be rather harsh and kind of a total bitch, so we would play pranks on her all the time. It started when I would casually put a banana on her desk after lunch every day for about a week. I never ate mine and would stick it in my pocket for a later time, but decided this was a better use of the banana. After about a week of her throwing away the mystery bananas and asking everyone in all of her classes if they know who is doing it, I didn't tell anyone but my closest confidants. I decided to step it up. I would put multiple bananas, oranges, apples, whatever I could find on her desk. One day, I brought a pineapple from home tucked under a sweater into her classroom while she was monitoring the halls. She absolutely lost it when she came into her desk and there was a whole pineapple just sitting there. I got out of there pretty quickly since it wasn't my class period and my presence would be a dead giveaway. I heard from kids in the class that she spent the first 15 minutes of class attempting to bribe them into revealing who did it. Anyway, I had a lot of trouble topping that. I couldn't think of fruits bigger than a pineapple that I could also conceal into a classroom. So I did what any teen would do. I asked my friends for some help and found out where she lived and me and two of my friends dropped off a box full of about $50 worth of exotic fruits and vegetables on her front door one evening. She came into class the next day with a giant bowl of fruit salad for all of her classes and a huge grin on her face. I admitted to her that I had done the bananas and pineapple and who the other two folks were that were in on the box of fruit and how we found her address. Her entire persona shifted after that prank. She was more fun, and she knew we liked her enough to prank her, and even though she was still strict, she was never overtly a bitch to the class anymore. So all in all, a good prank. Now, for the freak out. Since we already had a penchant for pranking this teacher, we were always on the lookout for good ways to do so. I had a substitute in her class one day, and it was the last class of the day for US government. I had her 2 separate years, and this substitute lady was clearly not very aggressive and was just giving us busy work for the day, not really doing anything fun or exciting. So I suggested to the class that we should turn everything in the classroom backwards. Everyone was on board, so now it was like 30-1 against this substitute, and she put up minimal resistance to the idea until everyone convinced her it'll be fine. Teacher's cool. We go and turn everything around in that classroom. Desks, posters, every book had the binding going in. We even moved the projector to the back of the classroom. The only thing we didn't touch was desk. So, bell rings, we all leave. I had to walk back by the classroom from my locker and I look inside and see her frantically trying to put it all back to normal by herself. I poke my head in the room and tell her it's all good and to leave it, and I see that she's crying. I felt really bad for the old girl after seeing that. She was so afraid they'd never let her work there again. So I grabbed another teacher from the social studies department and convinced the substitute that the teacher would be okay with the changes and that stuff like this happens all the time. She insisted on calling a principal to the room before she said it was okay. At this point, I don't want to get in trouble, so I bail and ask the teacher to cover for me and make sure it sticks. Sure enough, as the principal comes in the room, he just starts laughing, and it stays until the next day, when my teacher will be back. She taught the rest of the day from the back of the classroom until our class, when she made us flip everything back around. And I got detention. Not for the desks, but for making the sub cry. I have 2 from within the last 3 years. One I witnessed, and was the biggest, and the second was tiny, but much more satisfying, because I caused it, and it was a professor who kinda had it out for me. 1. I had a professor that told us we had to read 300 pages of a book and watch a 45-minute film on separate materials in 2 days, and that there would be a quiz in 2 days which would be the next time we had a lecture. She specifically said, the test is on the reading material we are finishing, and the video is just something to prepare you for the next lecture. The next lecture comes, and the quiz is completely on the film, and has nothing to do with the book. The next time we have a lecture in the following week, she storms in the class, and as she progressively starts crying harder and harder, she says, *3. That's how many of you passed a stupid 10-question pop quiz on a short film I warned you. You all needed to watch. This was supposed to be an easy couple of points for all of you. I was so busy trying to figure out where things fell apart. One missed my son's last baseball game of the season. You know what? You're the only people who passed, and because you clearly know how to do all of the work, you don't have to take the final. I'm giving you 3, a 100% on the final. Everyone else, tough. At the end of class, come and get your quizzes. If you scored less than 4, you also have an extra essay to write me, so stick around after class. A fail was less than 7, and I missed it by 1. Not because I played it in the background and wasn't paying full attention though. I didn't watch the film because I was reading 300 pages of the densest shit I've ever read from the 20th century. I knew the answers because it was a film on Cesar Chavez, and I'm from Salinas where he's basically seen as a messiah figure. 2. Same school. Little backstory. I had a teacher that hated my guts. He was notorious for being super difficult. He assigned reading over winter break before the first day of class, and on the first day he asked me if I'd done the reading while we waited 5 minutes before class started, and when I said I hadn't because I couldn't check my email over break, he got mad and said, "So what, you aren't going to lie to me?" To which I replied, "Why would you rather catch me in a lie when you ask me about something during lecture?" Dude had no patience for me after that. He rode me most of the class, and for our last exposition paper, I got permission to go against the prompts by my tar, and when he got his hands on it, he hated my position. Don't get me wrong. It had a fair bit of problems, but it didn't deserve. This has absolutely nothing to do with what I assigned, not even close. I wasn't allowed a rewrite, and where the papers usually have a percentage, this one just said F. He started calling me up after classes and encouraging me to drop his class, and I said fuck it, it's too late to get my money back for the class, so no. I'm gonna ride this plane right into the mountainside. So the final was coming up 1 week after we got the papers back, and me and my pothead study buddies in my class wanted to do a group session for finals. Because I didn't get a percentage, I calculated what my grade percentage was from my actual paper, and I realized depending on how low the F was, I might be able to pull off a ha. Fuck you, I passed. Once I did the final, I could calculate how low the F was on the paper. For this humanities course, a final has 3 sections. A vocabulary section, a fill in the blank with one of the examples section, and a massive essay section, where you tie the class concepts and material together to show a mastery of the subject. With my friends, I found out that each of the 3 tasks had different stuff on the study guide, which only said these things are important to know, and because we are all taking the same 3-hour test, it basically was an full way of saying, study everything. So I realized there's an easy way than killing ourselves studying for this thing. I opened the class email list, mass emailed everyone links, and permission to edit a Google Doc with a document covering each section. I had the words that needed to be defined on it ready for definitions on one, the name of the works and themes on another, and the evolution of the literature of that era's movement with the authors' names in chronological order. The email with the link said this: "Hello all, I realize we're all busy studying for several finals coming up next week, and I thought we can make this easier on all of us. We have created 3 documents, and if everyone, a class of over 100 students, contribute a couple of things each, with everyone adding cites to support the examples, so people can read it and create their own view on the topic, then come Sunday we can just print these out and start reading. We have permission from the professor to conduct a final study group, and all we ask of you all other than contributing is that you do not copy what we post to your final. We will email the TARS a copy of these so they can check for plagiarism. If you missed a class, my study group, the Pentaverate, has also created a class bible of sorts that has meticulous notes of every lecture and every TARS section. Please use it appropriately. the meltdown so finals rolls around, and just to rub it into that asshole's face, I sat front row right in front of his smug face. He even had the audacity to say, "There's really no point in you wasting your time here." At the end of hour 1, students started finishing, and I wrote so much I worked through the entire 3 hours. But a strange thing happened. In the dead silence of a lecture hall mid-final, every one of the people who finished first said, "Thank you," to me. The first couple of thank yous, I could see on the professor was thinking, why the hell are the smartest in the class thanking this idiot? He's not even gonna pass. Around 2 hours 30 minutes in, after I was thanked by about 100 students, he lost his shit, picked up and slammed the stack in front of one of the TARs and said, "Screw this, I'm getting a coffee." I scored 100% on the final and got a D+. C was barely considered passing, which means the only way I got a D+ was because he gave me a 0.F. I repeated the class with a different professor the next term, actually liked the guy enough to show up to office hours and work with him and ace the class. Freshman year of college I took a medical ethics class. There was a student during lecture who instead of paying attention was working on a chemistry assignment. At the time, we were supposed to be thinking on what she just lectured on and writing a response about it. A short paragraph on what was the ethical thing to do and why. We were talking about using cant at the time I think. Not important. Anyway, we don't turn these in, but she would go around and make sure we were at least doing it. He wasn't. So she got to his desk and saw what he was doing and blew up at him. Started screaming at him to leave her class. He refused. Then she started saying that he was distracting from other students, which honestly she was more distracting. No one else really noticed or cared if he was writing or not. We did notice when she started screaming. Eventually the guy left, but not before saying, "I hope you feel really stupid when you realize that you made fun of and kicked out an autistic student." He never did come back to class, but she tearfully apologized to us next lecture for her outburst. I mean all out sobs. For the whole class period. She was a shitty professor in general though. I had one writing assignment where we could say whatever we thought was the best way to handle the situation, but there was a certain way that she thought was the only way, and if we didn't argue that way we would not pass the assignment. I didn't agree with her, and I wrote it my way and got an A because the task grade anyway, and he thought she was being ridiculous. And then for our final exam, it was multiple choice. She forgot to print out all of the tests for a 100+ class. So we got the questions in installments. She would have the first 20 printed out, and the TARs were running back and forth when the next batch printed out for 120 questions. And she had 2 different versions of the test, so then we had to figure out which questions went to test A and which went to test B. Otherwise you might answer a couple questions twice. After this, a bunch of students complained, and we all got emailed from the dean saying she would look into it. The next year, my roommate wanted to take the class, and I turned her away until she told me who the professor was. It wasn't the teacher from my class. Turns out she was fired. Kinda. She had tenure, so really the university just told her she should retire, or at least take a break, and I guess she listened. University student here. So we had 2 different professors for the same course, who taught at the same hours. They both said that regardless of who we signed up to, we can decide for ourselves what class to go to. They both seemed to be very cool about it in the beginning. Our university has teachers' ratings, and my teacher's ratings were bad, so some people didn't even enter her first lecture and went to the other teacher. She asked why aren't there many people, and was told that it's because it's just the first week of the semester and people probably had exams from last semester to complete, so they were studying. Okay, she accepted that answer, but as time went by, even people who went to her lecture started to see how poorly she teaches, short attention span, talks about unrelated stuff instead of teaching. So obviously, more people started to ditch her class, and she became aware of it. She started talking a lot about how students are not coming to her class. During the class, it was very obvious she was taking huge offense. By the time we had a midterm, she was already vindictive. People can usually collect their friend's graded midterm if they are not in class to pick it up, but no, she forbid it and made all the students who were not in her class coordinate an office hour with her if they want to collect their exam. When people came during her office hour without sending her a mail, she just refused to give them the exam. She literally asked you to prove that you coordinated an office hour with her, but showing the email. This is when students started getting even more pissed off at her. Then, she decided to close down the course's resources on the course website as some kind of a protest. At this point even the faculty has had enough. At one of her last lectures, that was when she really broke down. She started talking about how people don't come to her lecture, blaming it all on some student's Facebook post from a year before, was telling us how the head of our program called her and started yelling at her, etc., and just broke down crying. Thankfully we were her last class because she was fired. Also, just so you can realize how fucked up this was, me and some other students were sitting in her class, not doing or understanding anything, only because she was bragging to other students about how she's making lists of students who don't attend her lectures. So we were sitting there, just for her to take a glance of our beautiful faces and remember them. I had to tread very carefully, because I stopped coming to her classes after a few weeks, and I got the highest midterm grade plus didn't forget to mail her for an office hour to collect it, so I can only imagine how much that pissed her off. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe the channel.